as you know, because you're also a woman in crypto, it in many ways still hasn't changed over a decade.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm with you there. It just has become different flavors.
Hmm.
Um, so for me, getting into Bitcoin, it was always the passion for me was always around the potential it had to solve um, income inequality issues in the developing world. And that comes from my original first real job and foray into professional working at the World Bank. I
2019.
Yeah, thanks. And as you remember, there really was only two paths back then. You were an engineer or you were a trader. And unless you got some of the coveted jobs at Coinbase, right, in marketing or some of the other departments. But for the most part, those were kind of your two options. And I did have some finance experience. So I started working with my former partner, Tyler. So I went through the finance route. But from a passion perspective, it always was important to me, and I've always been passionate about Bitcoin because of its potential to, realize those real world use cases. I think that it's morphed and stable coins are starting to fit that bill. But that is what got me into Bitcoin. So worked Bitcoin asset management since the Lucid days around 2017-ish.
Mhm.
Um, and then after Lucid, co-founded and ran Valkyrie Investments. So we launched some of the first crypto ETFs, but also just a bevy of structured products. So then I started really learning about public market funds and how you could make them more crypto native and more accessible for the vast public. After that, Valkyrie was sold. So last year, the ETF business was sold to CoinShares. The trusts were sold to Abra. I came on as the CEO of what was Cypherpunk Holdings. And I've been on the board since September 2021. So a long time.
Yeah.
So Cypherpunk is really interesting because they were the first public equity to be a MicroStrategy of Bitcoin. So they put their whole treasury in Bitcoin. They were publicly listed in 2018, made Bitcoin investments, and they were this incredible vehicle. It just stopped seeing participation from investors in the market when the ETFs were launched, but it was still a well-run company. So when the board approached me if I wanted to come on as the CEO last summer, we all sat down together and thought that the writing was on the wall that Solana, to do the same thing for Solana would be really meaningful and powerful.
Mhm.
The caveat being, we also wanted to run it as a tech company. So in 2024, we believe that, there needs to be access to Solana in the public markets, and there was no ETFs, but it can't just be a shell. It needs to be a real company. So we set up our validator business, and everything became public in September. So material strategy name change and dropped it a week before Breakpoint. And then been off to the races ever since. So we can talk about that. But I think your bigger question after that was why Solana was the second part of the question that you asked. And I think Solana is fascinating. I think that, again, I see Bitcoin and everything else as just extraordinarily different, having different utility, use cases, and participation. For applications and truly reaching, decentralized financial structures, I think that Solana Rails is the one and only. It is fast, it is cheap, it does have the best developers, it has all those different things that we always were originally excited about Ethereum having that platform for, but very quickly saw back then when gas became too expensive that, okay, like scale is impossible if this is already something that we're seeing. So for me, it just seems like the winner is going to be Solana. It currently is and will be for any projects that are trying to build that require that type of, um, I should say, pillars, if you will.
Mhm. I think your pivot towards Solana was a like a master move in a way, and it paid off very recently in so many ways, right?
Yeah.
But recently, Vitalik Buterin said that he wants Ethereum protocol and ecosystem to be as simple as Bitcoin's. He wants to pivot towards it so that the layers and the protocols are as simple as Bitcoin's. So I
I'm gonna
was
wear a tank
wondering,
top if that's okay.
please do whatever makes you most comfortable. So,
Okay, it got hot. Yep.
do you think the Solana ecosystem needs work, or are you planning to make any such changes with Solana, or are there any upgrades that we should look forward to?
Yeah, definitely. And that's where I'm proud of my team. So the two main players to focus on, and they all came through the acquisitions, was one, our CTO, Max Kaplan, and it'll answer your question.
Mhm.
But Max was the senior director of engineering at Kraken. And so he was like developer eight at Kraken, and just absolutely brilliant. And then you have Michael Hubbard. Most people in the ecosystem know him as Lane, and they were one of some of the top, core developers and operators in the Solana ecosystem. So to your point, these guys are always putting through code remits, and we're always running testnet for everything. So there's something that came out called Fire Dancer. We're running testnet for that. We have a blog, a technical blog about uh, bug hunting and we actually have a blog about how to run enterprise validators. So kind of like, here's our secret sauce. Um, so yeah, very, very active I mean, our bet and our belief is Solana. And our bet and belief is that the important way to build a company on Solana is providing that type of goodwill in the ecosystem by being actively involved rather than a passive participant. So we're very much running all the test nets for new code and putting through remits.
And since you mentioned ETFs, that is the hot topic. And how will this be a complete interview without me bringing that up?
Yeah.
So, as you must have noticed, very recently ETFs brought in record number of inflows, almost a billion in a week's time. And after the recent administration changes and having a friendlier SEC, the SEC chair has changed. Do you think that a sole ETF could be a reality sooner rather than later?
I absolutely think so. I think it'll be in spot form. I'm not sure when the administration's going to get comfortable with staking,
Mm.
but there is such precedent in so many jurisdictions with successful trading of a staked SOL ETF and just generally staked products. Canada just approved their staked SOL ETFs about a month ago. And that was with the usual suspects of Galaxy, Purpose, Evolve, and 3IQ. And they're trading great. But we've already had them on the Swiss Six and in Brazil and other jurisdictions for a while. So I believe that under Atkins, the staff is trying to understand how staked products will work.
Mhm.
And they've had their applications in from some of the top players for ETH for a while.
Yeah.
So I think that they likely will be assessing as ETH first and then down the line. But I do think, to your question, I'm very bullish that it'll come out soon because they've already started trading Sol CME futures. And then also the volatility shares, ETFs, both traditional and leveraged, including those Sol futures, are trading well. So I can't see why that wouldn't be a logical transition
But if you had to put a rough timeline to it, you would say.
before the end of next quarter.
Really?
I
That,
think potentially.
well, that.
Yeah, yeah. I think so for spot, not staked.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I don't see why not, given the successful trading of the futures ETFs and that being previous precedent for approving the other ETFs.
Mhm. After the, Trump administration came in and the new SEC, we saw lawsuits drop like flies because all of the aggressive approach that the SEC was taking before with Gensler, we saw them reduce with time. So is it motivating in a way for you to take some chances? Do you see some obstacles out of your way? Is it motivating the company to probably, bet on something they wouldn't
Yeah.
have before?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we filed our NASDAQ application as well.
Mhm.
Um, so Galaxy, I believe, trades today, and I think DeFi traded on Monday. So a lot of the Canadian issuers are now, moving down south and cross-listing.
Mhm.
And that's very much because of a pro administration in office. One thing to your point, very specifically, I can point to is we're very excited about tokenization of our stock. And we came out publicly, I think it was last week, that 2 weeks ago, that we're going to try to be first on tokenizing our shares. And that would be in the US because Superstate is a SEC approved transfer agent. So I think that if you want to talk about, pushing the envelope, I don't think talking about tokenization of public shares would have even been a conversation you would want to approach with the SEC. And now instead, they're very open to the idea to the extent that Hester Pierce has even come out with comments to that effect.
Mhm.
So I think that's like maybe one of the biggest examples to show that this administration's different by having all these conversations. And I think that that's, just one of the biggest ones. So yes, we're all in on trying to work with the staff down here on pushing the envelope with that. And then of course, seeing that Jito and Multicoin had conversations with the SEC about liquid staking tokens as well is very interesting. And again, I think never would have happened until the new administration.
Yeah. In fact, I think on May 12th, they had a crypto task force roundtable where tokenization was the topic of, like, the main topic.
Yep. Yeah.
Roundtable discussions.
Yeah. It was, and then they had another yesterday.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And Atkins has been delivering positive statements.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's very cool. It's very cool. I have concerns about some things, but I'm generally very excited about it being promotional, and the ability to have sandboxes and test it out for at least for products that have already been tried and true in different jurisdictions.
Mhm.
It seems like we're just, catching up to where we should be. So I think that that's great. And the OSC is also trying to figure it out. Just because they've traded products earlier and companies doesn't mean that they've approved any of these projects either.
Yeah,
So I think everybody is going through a learning curve, which means that we can't hold our breath, but we can keep, working as hard as we can to educate and get them there.
true, very true. My next question was about, whenever we talk about crypto, we talk about the crypto community. We
Yeah.
said there's a sense of community when we speak of anything. But
Yeah.
given the number of recent rug pulls
Yeah.
and the breach in the essential feeling of that, uh, which goes like hand in hand with the crypto community, like I said, how
Yeah.
does Solana and Soul Strategies plan on winning community trust or maintaining the trust that they have already established?
Wow. You know what? That's the best question I've been asked
Mm.
ever. And it's something I think about all the time. But that's a that I'm gonna write a blog post later. Like that's the best question I've ever been asked by a reporter, by the way. So that's actually really core to the way I think about succeeding as a company is by, and just to go Solana specific, and then we'll take it even further.
Mhm.
It is like by having Max and Michael and the team constantly engage in the protocol, I think it's the most important thing for our success as a company to always show that we're not just engaging with the community, but in the trenches with the community and building with all the actual contributors and therefore keeping the community strong and trying to be part of keeping it strong because your question has a lot of elements to it because number one to your what I think you're also getting to is I think that tokens live and die by their communities and we've seen that that's exactly right you see a hot token, layer one, layer two. Their communities are super excited, lots of developers, and then they move to the next, and that project effectively dies a slow death,
Yeah.
or it just doesn't innovate much. Um, so I think that that's bang on of, how we think about it. And then it's interesting with the validators that we pick to acquire because they are retail validators. Even though we're running an institutional validator business and you can use any of the validators, right? Like there's no reason not to. They're all the highest performing, some of the highest performing validators in the entire network. But Cogent, Orangefin, and Lane notoriously are all very strong communities around that validator and retail stakers. So they all have discords, they all have their own different communities, they all have their different like staking loyal, like their stakers are loyal to that brand and to the people running those brands. So Max and Mike Law as an example. So then you see communities within a community. And that's something important from the get-go for us is ensuring that we're supporting all of our brands' communities as well as supporting the general ecosystem as a whole. Because if we don't, we won't succeed, I think, to the way that I want to succeed. And then two, Solana as well. It's only by having people who are really passionate about it continuing to engage. So yeah, it's something that we talk about all the time, and that's the best question I've ever heard because a community will, a token will live or die by their community. Totally true.
Very true. Um, I wanted to know what do you think about what is your opinion on the increasing institutional adoption of crypto, all kinds of crypto? Because with changing regulations, we see more and more companies applying for banking licenses and traditional banks entering crypto space. So,
Thinking about what to say. I have a lot of feelings about it, but great over wine. Um, I have very mixed feelings.
Mhm,
Um, I think that it's great that we've gotten to a point of market validity where we can start operating comfortably and confidently within traditional market structures. At the same time, at least Bitcoin was supposed to be a experiment to opt out of those systems. And sometimes my concerns are on if we're still holding true to our values and morals of what Satoshi originally had in mind of being a peer-to-peer electronic
mhm,
system that launched very specifically on January 3rd, 2009. So I think that on the one hand, again, I think it's wonderful. And then on the other hand, I am concerned about the interests of the new participants being number go up only, rather than engaging and supporting the underlying Bitcoin core developers and community.
mhm. And okay, that actually covered it really well. So there is a possibility that you'll